Question 1. Regulatory review indicates that in total loss claims, the determination of actual cash value (ACV) is a critical component of fair settlement. When a vehicle is deemed a total loss, what is the most appropriate method for establishing the ACV, ensuring compliance with the principles of indemnity and regulatory expectations for claims handling? Option A. Conduct a thorough market survey using multiple reputable sources, adjusting for the specific vehicle's condition, mileage, options, and regional market factors, and document the findings to support the settlement offer. Option B. Accept the first valuation provided by a third-party appraisal service without independent verification, prioritizing rapid claim closure. Option C. Offer a settlement based on the lowest comparable vehicle found in any available database, regardless of its specific features or condition relative to the insured vehicle. Option D. Utilize a single, generic online valuation tool and offer the resulting figure as the ACV, assuming it represents a fair market price. The correct answer is D. Utilize a single, generic online valuation tool and offer the resulting figure as the ACV, assuming it represents a fair market price. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because determining the actual cash value, ACV, of a total loss vehicle requires careful consideration of market conditions and the specific vehicle's attributes, while adhering to regulatory requirements for fair settlement. The challenge lies in balancing the insurer's obligation to indemnify the policyholder with the need to avoid overpayment, all within the bounds of regulatory guidance. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented valuation process that accurately reflects the current market value of a comparable vehicle. This includes considering the vehicle's age, mileage, condition, options, and any applicable market adjustments. The regulatory framework for the Foundations of Claims certificate emphasizes fair treatment of customers and accurate claims handling. Therefore, a valuation that is demonstrably based on objective market data and clearly communicated to the policyholder aligns with these principles. This approach ensures the policyholder receives an indemnity that places them in a similar financial position to that which they were before the loss, as required by insurance principles and regulatory oversight. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on a generic online valuation tool without further investigation. This fails to account for the specific condition and features of the insured vehicle and may not reflect local market realities, potentially leading to an underpayment and a breach of the duty to indemnify. Another incorrect approach is to offer a settlement based on the lowest available comparable vehicle without considering the range of market values or the specific attributes of the insured vehicle. This risks underpaying the policyholder and failing to meet the ACV requirement. Finally, an approach that prioritizes closing the claim quickly over ensuring an accurate and fair settlement, such as accepting the first offer from a third-party valuation service without independent verification, can lead to regulatory scrutiny and customer dissatisfaction, violating the principles of good faith and fair dealing. Professionals should approach total loss valuations by first understanding the specific policy terms and conditions. They must then conduct a comprehensive market survey using multiple reputable sources, adjusting for the unique characteristics of the insured vehicle. Transparency with the policyholder throughout this process, including explaining the valuation methodology and providing supporting documentation, is crucial for building trust and ensuring compliance. Question 2. Stakeholder feedback indicates a growing concern regarding the potential for claims handlers to be unduly influenced by internal cost-saving targets when assessing the validity and value of complex, high-value claims. In such a situation, where a policyholder has submitted a claim that appears to be valid, but the potential payout is substantial, what is the most ethically sound and regulatorily compliant approach for a claims handler to adopt? Option A. Conduct a thorough and objective investigation of the claim, gathering all relevant evidence, applying policy terms fairly, and communicating transparently with the policyholder throughout the process, regardless of internal cost-saving pressures. Option B. Inform the policyholder that due to the high value of the claim and the insurer's cost-saving objectives, a settlement may be significantly delayed or require the policyholder to provide an extensive amount of additional documentation beyond what is typically required. Option C. Expedite the claims process by accepting the policyholder's initial valuation of the claim without independent verification to quickly close the file and demonstrate efficiency, even if this means a potentially overpayment. Option D. Prioritize achieving the internal cost-saving target by negotiating a settlement with the policyholder that is significantly lower than the initial assessment of the claim's value, emphasizing the potential for protracted disputes if a higher settlement is pursued. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough and objective investigation of the claim, gathering all relevant evidence, applying policy terms fairly, and communicating transparently with the policyholder throughout the process, regardless of internal cost-saving pressures. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims handler to balance the insurer's need to manage costs with the policyholder's right to a fair and timely settlement, all while adhering to the principles of good faith and fair dealing. The pressure to reduce expenditure, coupled with the potential for a large claim, creates a conflict that demands careful ethical consideration and adherence to regulatory guidelines. The claims handler must navigate this situation without compromising their professional integrity or violating the trust placed in them by both the policyholder and the insurer. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective investigation of the claim, gathering all necessary evidence, and applying the policy terms fairly and consistently. This approach upholds the duty of good faith and fair dealing, which is a cornerstone of insurance regulation. By conducting a comprehensive review and communicating transparently with the policyholder, the claims handler ensures that the settlement, whether it be a full payment or a reasoned denial, is based on facts and policy provisions, not on undue pressure to minimize costs. This aligns with the regulatory expectation that insurers act with integrity and provide a fair claims process. An incorrect approach would be to unduly influence the policyholder towards a settlement figure that is significantly lower than the assessed value of the claim, solely to reduce the insurer's payout. This action would violate the duty of good faith and fair dealing, as it prioritizes the insurer's financial interests over the policyholder's contractual rights. Such behavior could be construed as unfair claims handling, potentially leading to regulatory sanctions and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation and settlement process unreasonably, hoping the policyholder will accept a less favorable outcome due to financial pressure or frustration. This tactic also breaches the duty of good faith and fair dealing by not acting with due diligence and promptness in handling the claim. Regulatory bodies often have specific guidelines regarding the timeframe for claims processing, and prolonged, unjustified delays are typically viewed as misconduct. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to impartiality, thoroughness, and transparency. Claims handlers must first understand the policy terms and conditions thoroughly. They should then conduct an objective investigation, gathering all relevant evidence without bias. Throughout the process, clear and consistent communication with the policyholder is essential, explaining the steps being taken, the information required, and the rationale behind any decisions. If faced with conflicting pressures, such as cost-saving targets versus the merits of a claim, the handler must prioritize ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, seeking guidance from supervisors or legal counsel if necessary, rather than compromising on principles of fairness and good faith. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal that a claims handler, reviewing a complex liability claim involving a product defect that caused severe injury, has focused exclusively on calculating the claimant's medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering. The handler has not considered whether the manufacturer's conduct in knowingly releasing a defective product, despite internal warnings, might warrant punitive damages under the applicable regulatory framework. Which of the following approaches best reflects the required regulatory compliance and professional responsibility in this situation? Option A. The claims handler should only consider punitive damages if the claimant explicitly demands them in their initial claim submission. Option B. The claims handler should investigate the manufacturer's conduct to determine if it meets the legal threshold for punitive damages, considering factors such as intent, recklessness, and the potential for deterrence, in consultation with legal counsel. Option C. The claims handler should disregard the possibility of punitive damages, as the primary focus of claims handling is to compensate for actual losses incurred by the claimant. Option D. The claims handler should automatically include a significant punitive damages component in the settlement offer to ensure the claimant is adequately compensated for the severity of their injuries. The correct answer is B. The claims handler should investigate the manufacturer's conduct to determine if it meets the legal threshold for punitive damages, considering factors such as intent, recklessness, and the potential for deterrence in consultation with legal counsel. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims handler to navigate the complex and often subjective nature of punitive damages within the specific regulatory framework of the Foundations of Claims Certificate exam. The core challenge lies in distinguishing between compensatory damages, which aim to make the injured party whole, and punitive damages, which are intended to punish the wrongdoer and deter similar conduct. Misinterpreting or misapplying the principles governing punitive damages can lead to significant financial and reputational consequences for the insurer and potentially unfair outcomes for the claimant. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any award of punitive damages is legally justified and aligns with the principles of fairness and proportionality as dictated by the relevant regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the legal basis for punitive damages, which typically requires proof of egregious conduct such as malice, fraud, or gross negligence. It necessitates a careful review of the evidence to determine if the defendant's actions were intentional, reckless, or demonstrated a conscious disregard for the rights and safety of others. This approach aligns with the regulatory framework by ensuring that punitive damages are not awarded arbitrarily, but are reserved for situations where such an award serves the public interest in punishment and deterrence. It upholds ethical principles by preventing the insurer from contributing to an unjust enrichment of the claimant beyond what is necessary to compensate for their losses, while also acknowledging the role of damages in shaping corporate behavior. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the extent of the claimant's compensatory losses fails to recognize the distinct purpose of punitive damages. This approach is ethically flawed as it conflates compensation with punishment, potentially leading to an excessive award that does not serve the deterrent or punitive function. It also risks violating regulatory principles by awarding damages without the requisite proof of egregious conduct. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the possibility of punitive damages entirely, regardless of the evidence of the defendant's conduct, is also professionally unsound. This approach fails to acknowledge the legal and societal role of punitive damages in holding wrongdoers accountable for particularly harmful behavior. It may lead to a failure to adequately address situations where punitive damages are legally warranted, potentially exposing the insurer to claims of bad faith or inadequate defense. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a comprehensive review of the claim facts and applicable law. The claims handler must identify whether the claimant's allegations, if proven, could support a claim for punitive damages. This involves assessing the nature of the defendant's conduct against the legal standards for punitive damages in the relevant jurisdiction. If there is a potential for punitive damages, the handler should consult with legal counsel to obtain expert advice on the likelihood of success and the potential range of such damages. Throughout the claims handling process, maintaining clear and accurate documentation of the evidence and legal analysis is crucial. Question 4. The efficiency study reveals that a significant portion of flood insurance claims processed by the company are experiencing delays due to what appears to be a lack of standardized procedures for damage assessment and payment authorization. The claims manager is considering several options to address this issue. Which of the following approaches best aligns with federal insurance regulations governing the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP? Option A. Outsourcing the majority of NFIP claims handling to a third-party administrator that specializes in general property claims, assuming they can meet the company's internal efficiency targets. Option B. Implementing a new internal claims processing system that mirrors the company's existing property insurance claims handling protocols, with a focus on reducing turnaround times. Option C. Developing and enforcing a comprehensive claims handling manual specifically for NFIP claims, ensuring all adjusters receive mandatory training on its contents and related federal regulations, and requiring strict adherence to FEMA guidelines for damage assessment and payment. Option D. Expediting claim payments by authorizing adjusters to make provisional payments based on initial assessments, with detailed documentation to follow at a later date to improve customer satisfaction metrics. The correct answer is B. Implementing a new internal claims processing system that mirrors the company's existing property insurance claims handling protocols, with a focus on reducing turnaround times. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a claims professional to navigate the complexities of federal insurance regulations, specifically concerning the handling of flood insurance claims under the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP. The challenge lies in ensuring that all claims handling practices strictly adhere to the NFIP mandatory requirements, which are designed to ensure fairness, accuracy, and compliance with federal law. Failure to do so can result in regulatory penalties, financial repercussions, and damage to the insurer's reputation. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement the correct procedures, distinguishing them from less compliant or potentially harmful alternatives. The correct approach involves diligently adhering to the NFIP claims manual and associated federal regulations when processing flood insurance claims. This means ensuring that all adjusters are properly trained on NFIP procedures, that claim files contain all required documentation, and that payments are made in accordance with the program's guidelines, including the use of approved forms and methodologies for estimating damages. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal and regulatory framework governing the NFIP, as established by federal law and administered by FEMA. Compliance with these regulations is not optional. It is a mandatory requirement for all participating insurance companies. An incorrect approach would be to apply standard property insurance claims handling procedures without specific consideration for NFIP requirements. This is a regulatory failure because the NFIP has distinct rules and procedures that differ from those for standard property insurance. These differences are critical for ensuring that policyholders receive the correct benefits and that the program operates efficiently and equitably. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed of claim settlement over regulatory compliance. While efficiency is important, it cannot come at the expense of adhering to federal mandates. This approach is ethically and regulatorily flawed because it risks underpaying claims, misrepresenting claim status, or failing to collect necessary documentation, all of which violate NFIP regulations and ethical obligations to policyholders. A further incorrect approach would be to delegate NFIP claims handling to personnel who have not received specific training on the program's regulations and procedures. This is a significant regulatory failure as it increases the likelihood of errors and noncompliance, potentially leading to improper claim payments or denials, and exposing the insurer to penalties. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the applicable regulatory framework. Professionals must proactively seek out and familiarize themselves with the specific regulations governing the types of claims they handle. When in doubt, consulting the relevant regulatory guidance, such as the NFIP Claims Manual, or seeking advice from legal or compliance departments is essential. A commitment to ongoing training and a culture of compliance are paramount to ensuring that all claims are handled in a manner that is both efficient and fully compliant with federal law. Question 5. Research into the negotiation and settlement of a complex liability claim reveals differing strategies employed by claims handlers. One handler, under pressure to reduce outstanding reserves, proposes a settlement figure that is substantially lower than the initial assessment of the claim's value, citing the cost of potential litigation as leverage. Another handler, after a thorough review of the evidence and policy, engages in detailed discussions with the claimant, explaining the basis for their offer and exploring areas of potential compromise to reach a mutually agreeable resolution. A third handler, facing a similar situation, adopts a passive approach, providing minimal information and making only a token offer, hoping the claimant will abandon the claim. Which approach best aligns with the principles of fair and ethical claims handling? Option A. Adopting a passive approach, providing minimal information and making a token offer. Option B. Proposing a settlement figure substantially lower than the assessed value, leveraging the cost of litigation. Option C. Engaging in detailed discussions, explaining the offer's basis, and exploring compromise for mutual agreement. Option D. Focusing solely on reducing outstanding reserves without regard to the claim's merits. The correct answer is B. Proposing a settlement figure substantially lower than the assessed value, leveraging the cost of litigation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the claims handler must balance the insurer's obligation to settle claims fairly and efficiently with the claimant's right to receive appropriate compensation. The pressure to settle quickly, driven by internal targets or the desire to avoid protracted litigation, can lead to suboptimal outcomes for both parties if not managed ethically and within regulatory boundaries. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any settlement is based on a thorough assessment of the claim's merits, the applicable policy terms, and relevant legal principles, rather than solely on expediency. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation of the claim, a clear understanding of the policy coverage, and a negotiation strategy grounded in the evidence and legal framework. This approach ensures that the settlement offer is fair, reasonable, and justifiable, aligning with the insurer's duty of good faith and fair dealing. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of claims handling that require insurers to act honestly and reasonably, avoiding any conduct that could be construed as unfair or misleading. This aligns with the overarching regulatory expectation that insurers will manage claims in a manner that protects the interests of policyholders, while also managing the insurer's liabilities responsibly. An incorrect approach that involves making an offer significantly below the assessed value of the claim, without a clear justification based on policy exclusions or disputed facts, constitutes a failure to act in good faith. This can lead to allegations of unfair claims settlement practices, potentially resulting in regulatory sanctions and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, that of refusing to engage in meaningful negotiation or delaying settlement unreasonably without valid cause, also violates the duty of good faith and fair dealing. Such actions can be seen as an attempt to coerce the claimant into accepting a less favorable settlement or to wear them down, which is ethically and regulatorily unacceptable. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a comprehensive understanding of the claim's facts and legal context. This involves conducting a thorough investigation, accurately assessing liability and quantum, and understanding the policy's terms and conditions. Negotiations should be conducted transparently and in good faith, with offers and counteroffers clearly reasoned and supported by evidence. Regular communication with the claimant or their representative, explaining the basis for decisions and settlement proposals, is crucial. If disputes arise, the professional should be prepared to justify their position based on objective criteria and regulatory requirements, and to escalate the matter appropriately if a mutually agreeable settlement cannot be reached. Question 6. To address the challenge of potential fraudulent claims while ensuring efficient processing of legitimate ones, a claims handler encounters a claim with several unusual characteristics. The claimant has provided documentation that appears to be in order, but the circumstances of the loss seem improbable, and there are minor inconsistencies in the narrative provided. What is the most appropriate course of action for the claims handler? Strictly adhering to the regulatory framework for the Foundations of Claims Certificate. Option A. Conduct a preliminary review to gather additional information and cross-reference the inconsistencies with known fraud indicators and internal data, and if suspicion persists, escalate to the Fraud Investigation Unit with a detailed summary of findings. Option B. Process the claim as normal, assuming the claimant is honest, and document the unusual characteristics for future reference without further immediate action. Option C. Contact the claimant directly and confront them with the perceived inconsistencies, demanding further explanation before proceeding with any part of the claim. Option D. Immediately escalate the claim to the Fraud Investigation Unit for a full review, placing a hold on all payments until the investigation is complete. Correct answer is D. Immediately escalate the claim to the Fraud Investigation Unit for a full review, placing a hold on all payments until the investigation is complete. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims handler to balance the imperative of efficient claims processing with the critical duty to detect and prevent fraudulent activity, all while adhering strictly to regulatory requirements. Misjudging the indicators of potential fraud can lead to financial losses for the insurer, and conversely, wrongly accusing a genuine claimant can result in reputational damage and regulatory sanctions. The Foundations of Claims Certificate exam emphasizes a thorough understanding of these responsibilities within the specified regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based review of the claim, cross-referencing information against known fraud indicators and internal data, and escalating concerns through established channels for further investigation. This aligns with the regulatory expectation that insurers will take reasonable steps to prevent and detect fraud. Specifically, it reflects the principles of due diligence and responsible claims management, ensuring that resources are allocated appropriately to investigate suspicious claims without unduly delaying legitimate ones. This approach upholds the integrity of the claims process and demonstrates compliance with the insurer's obligations under relevant legislation and industry codes of conduct. An incorrect approach that involves immediately rejecting a claim based on a single, unverified suspicion fails to adhere to the principles of fairness and due process. This could lead to a breach of regulatory requirements concerning fair treatment of customers and may expose the insurer to complaints and potential penalties. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore potential red flags due to pressure to process claims quickly, directly contravenes the insurer's duty to prevent and detect fraud. This negligence can result in significant financial losses for the insurer and undermine public trust in the insurance industry. Furthermore, an approach that involves making assumptions about the claimant's intent without gathering sufficient evidence is ethically unsound and can lead to wrongful accusations, damaging both the claimant's and the insurer's reputation. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough, objective, and documented assessment of all claims. This involves understanding and applying established fraud detection protocols, maintaining a critical but unbiased perspective, and knowing when and how to escalate concerns. The process should be guided by regulatory requirements, internal policies, and ethical considerations, ensuring that all actions are justifiable and defensible. Question 7. Analysis of a scenario where a claims handler is presented with a moderately complex building insurance claim involving a dispute over the scope of repair work. The policyholder is elderly and has expressed some difficulty understanding technical insurance jargon. The claims handler is considering recommending alternative dispute resolution (ADR) to expedite the settlement. Which of the following approaches best reflects the professional and regulatory obligations in this situation? Option A. Suggest that the policyholder engage a solicitor to represent them in negotiations, as this will ensure their interests are protected. Option B. Propose mediation as a first step, ensuring the mediator is experienced in handling vulnerable individuals and that the process is explained in simple terms to the policyholder. Option C. Immediately initiate arbitration, as this is a binding process that will definitively resolve the dispute quickly. Option D. Inform the policyholder that the insurer will proceed with an independent assessment of the repairs and that their agreement is not required for this process. The correct answer is B. Propose mediation as a first step, ensuring the mediator is experienced in handling vulnerable individuals and that the process is explained in simple terms to the policyholder. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims handler to balance the insurer's need for efficient resolution with the policyholder's right to a fair and appropriate claims process, particularly when considering the implications of alternative dispute resolution (ADR). The claims handler must exercise careful judgment to ensure that any ADR process proposed or entered into is suitable for the specific claim and does not disadvantage the policyholder or compromise the integrity of the claims handling process. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the claim's complexity, the policyholder's circumstances, and the potential benefits and drawbacks of various ADR methods before recommending or engaging in one. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of good faith and fair dealing expected of insurers. Specifically, it reflects the regulatory expectation that insurers will act reasonably and consider the policyholder's best interests when seeking to resolve disputes. By evaluating the suitability of ADR, the claims handler demonstrates a commitment to finding a resolution that is proportionate to the claim and acceptable to both parties, thereby upholding the spirit of the regulatory framework governing claims handling. An incorrect approach of unilaterally imposing mediation without assessing its suitability fails to consider the policyholder's capacity to engage effectively in such a process. This could lead to a situation where the policyholder feels pressured or unable to participate meaningfully, potentially resulting in an unfair outcome and a breach of the insurer's duty of care. Another incorrect approach of dismissing ADR outright, regardless of its potential to efficiently resolve the dispute, could be seen as an unwillingness to explore reasonable avenues for settlement, potentially leading to unnecessary litigation and increased costs for both parties, which may not be in line with regulatory expectations for efficient claims management. A third incorrect approach of recommending a complex ADR process that the policyholder clearly cannot understand or afford would be ethically unsound and likely contravene regulatory guidance on accessibility and fairness in dispute resolution. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured evaluation. First, understand the nature and complexity of the claim. Second, assess the policyholder's situation, including their understanding of the process and their ability to participate. Third, identify potential ADR methods, e.g., negotiation, mediation, arbitration, and evaluate their suitability based on the claim's characteristics and the policyholder's circumstances. Fourth, communicate clearly with the policyholder about the proposed ADR process, its implications, and their rights. Finally, ensure that any chosen ADR method is fair, proportionate, and serves the overarching goal of achieving a just and efficient resolution. Question 8. The investigation demonstrates a proactive approach to gathering evidence for a complex liability claim by systematically requesting specific documentation from the claimant, cross-referencing this with publicly available data where relevant, and conducting a recorded interview with the claimant to clarify key details. Which of the following best describes the professional and regulatory soundness of this investigative strategy? Option A. This strategy is inefficient because it does not immediately involve third-party surveillance to confirm the claimant's activities. Option B. This strategy is questionable because it relies too heavily on claimant-provided documentation, which may be biased. Option C. This strategy is problematic as it involves intrusive data gathering through public records without explicit consent. Option D. This strategy is sound as it prioritizes direct, verifiable evidence and structured communication, aligning with regulatory expectations for thoroughness and fairness. The correct answer is D. This strategy is sound as it prioritizes direct, verifiable evidence and structured communication, aligning with regulatory expectations for thoroughness and fairness. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a claims handler must balance the need for thoroughness with the imperative to act within regulatory boundaries and ethical principles. The challenge lies in gathering sufficient evidence to assess the validity and quantum of a claim without infringing upon the claimant's privacy or engaging in practices that could be deemed unfair or misleading. Adhering to the Foundations of Claims Certificate's regulatory framework, which emphasizes fair treatment of customers and accurate claims handling, is paramount. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of evidence gathering, focusing on obtaining information directly relevant to the claim's assessment. This includes requesting specific documentation from the claimant, utilizing publicly available information where appropriate, and conducting interviews with a clear purpose and consent. This method aligns with the regulatory expectation of acting with integrity and competence, ensuring that all decisions are based on verifiable facts and that the claimant is treated with respect. The regulatory framework implicitly requires that investigations are proportionate to the claim's complexity and value, avoiding unnecessary intrusion. An incorrect approach would be to engage in speculative or intrusive information gathering, such as accessing private social media profiles without consent or making unsubstantiated assumptions about the claimant's circumstances. This could violate data protection principles and lead to a breach of trust, potentially resulting in regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on hearsay or unverified third-party information without independent corroboration. This undermines the principle of objective assessment and could lead to an unfair outcome for the claimant. Furthermore, failing to document the investigation process thoroughly, including the rationale for information requests and the evidence obtained, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure, as it prevents proper oversight and accountability. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes a clear understanding of the claim's particulars, the relevant regulatory requirements, and ethical considerations. This involves developing an investigation plan, identifying necessary evidence, and determining the most appropriate and least intrusive methods for obtaining it. Regular review of the investigation's progress against the plan and regulatory standards is crucial, with a commitment to transparency and fairness throughout the process. Question 9. During the evaluation of the first notice of loss FNOL process for a new motor insurance policyholder who has reported a minor collision, which of the following approaches best optimizes the process while adhering to regulatory expectations for efficient and fair claims handling? Option A. An immediate assessment of fault and a preliminary offer of settlement based on the claimant's initial description of the event. Option B. A structured intake that gathers essential policy and incident details, confirms coverage basics, and clearly outlines the immediate next steps and expected timelines for the claimant. Option C, an in-depth interview requiring the claimant to provide a detailed chronological account of the incident, including witness information and precise impact angles, before any coverage confirmation. Option D, a rapid, high-volume data entry system that prioritizes capturing as many details as possible about the incident, regardless of immediate relevance, to build a comprehensive initial record. Correct answer is B, a structured intake that gathers essential policy and incident details, confirms coverage basics, and clearly outlines the immediate next steps and expected timelines for the claimant. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the speed of initial information gathering at first notice of loss, FNOL, can directly impact the efficiency and fairness of the subsequent claims handling process. Balancing the need for prompt data collection with the requirement for accuracy and adherence to regulatory guidelines is crucial. Misinterpreting or misapplying FNOL procedures can lead to delays, incorrect assessments, and potential breaches of regulatory obligations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the initial contact sets the right tone and establishes a foundation for a compliant and customer-centric claims journey. The correct approach involves a structured and empathetic intake process that gathers essential details while clearly communicating next steps to the claimant. This approach is right because it prioritizes obtaining the core information needed to initiate the claim investigation promptly, such as policy details, date and time of loss, and a brief description of the incident. Simultaneously, it demonstrates a commitment to customer service by providing clear guidance on what the claimant can expect, thereby managing expectations and fostering trust. This aligns with regulatory expectations for fair and efficient claims handling, ensuring that the insurer acts with due diligence from the outset. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without ensuring data accuracy or claimant understanding would fail to meet regulatory standards. This could lead to incomplete or erroneous information being recorded, necessitating costly and time-consuming corrections later in the claims process. It also risks alienating the claimant by appearing rushed or indifferent to their situation, potentially leading to complaints and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that involves extensive, detailed questioning at the initial FNOL stage, beyond what is reasonably necessary to initiate the claim, would be inefficient and could overwhelm the claimant. While thoroughness is important, it must be balanced with practicality. This approach could delay the commencement of the investigation and create an unnecessarily burdensome experience for the policyholder, potentially contravening principles of good faith and fair dealing. A further incorrect approach that involves making definitive judgments or offering settlement at the FNOL stage is highly inappropriate and likely violates regulatory requirements. FNOL is an information gathering stage, not an assessment or adjudication phase. Premature conclusions can lead to unfair outcomes, prejudice the investigation, and expose the insurer to regulatory scrutiny for acting without sufficient information. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the FNOL purpose, to initiate the claims process efficiently and effectively. This requires a balanced approach that prioritizes gathering essential information, maintaining accurate records, demonstrating empathy and clear communication with the claimant, and adhering strictly to internal procedures and regulatory mandates for fair claims handling. Professionals should be trained to identify critical information, manage claimant expectations, and escalate complex or unusual situations appropriately. Question 10. Cost-benefit analysis shows that obtaining an expert opinion on the cause of a minor property damage claim, where the policyholder's explanation appears plausible and internal technical resources suggest a straightforward resolution, would incur significant fees. The claims handler has access to standard industry guidelines and can consult with a senior colleague for a second opinion. Which of the following actions best aligns with the principles of prudent claims handling and regulatory expectations for the foundations of claims certificate? Option A. Request an expert opinion solely on the cost of repairs without investigating the cause of the damage to speed up settlement. Option B. Engage an expert who has previously provided favorable opinions to the insurer to expedite the assessment process. Option C. Decline to obtain an expert opinion, relying on internal resources and industry guidelines to assess the claim and document the rationale for this decision. Option D. Commission an independent expert opinion to provide a definitive assessment of the cause of damage, ensuring all possibilities are explored. Correct answer is D. Commission an independent expert opinion to provide a definitive assessment of the cause of damage, ensuring all possibilities are explored. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to critically evaluate the necessity and reliability of expert opinions, balancing the potential benefits of obtaining such opinions against their costs and the risk of bias. The claims handler must act with integrity and in the best interests of the policyholder and insurer, adhering to the principles of fairness and proportionality. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of whether an expert opinion is genuinely required to resolve a complex technical issue that cannot be adequately addressed by the claims handler's own knowledge or readily available information. This assessment should consider the potential impact of the expert's findings on the claim's outcome, the proportionality of the cost of the expert's fees to the value of the claim, and the need to obtain an independent and unbiased opinion. The regulatory framework for the Foundations of Claims certificate emphasizes the importance of acting with due skill, care, and diligence, and in accordance with the principles of good faith and fair dealing. Obtaining an expert opinion without a clear justification, or when it is not proportionate to the claim's value, could be seen as a failure to act diligently or in good faith, potentially leading to unnecessary costs for the insurer and delays for the policyholder. Furthermore, the selection of an expert should prioritize independence and expertise to ensure the opinion is objective and reliable. An incorrect approach would be to automatically commission an expert opinion simply because the claim involves a technical element, without first attempting to gather sufficient information or consult internal resources. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and could lead to an unnecessary expenditure of resources. Another incorrect approach would be to select an expert based on their perceived willingness to provide a favorable opinion, rather than their genuine expertise and independence. This would compromise the integrity of the claims process and potentially lead to a biased assessment, violating ethical obligations and regulatory expectations of fairness. A further incorrect approach would be to disregard an expert opinion that is critical of the insurer's initial assessment without a well-founded and documented reason, potentially leading to an unfair outcome for the policyholder. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process when considering expert opinions. This involves 1. Clearly identifying the specific technical or factual question that requires expert input. 2. Assessing whether internal expertise or readily available information can address the question. 3. If expert input is deemed necessary, evaluating the proportionality of the cost of the expert opinion to the claim's value and potential impact. 4. Selecting an expert based on their demonstrable expertise, independence, and reputation. 5. Clearly defining the scope of the expert's instructions and the questions they need to answer. And 6. Critically reviewing the expert's report for clarity, completeness, and logical reasoning, and considering its implications for the claim's resolution. Question 11. Cost-benefit analysis shows that expediting the settlement of a complex, high-value claim by accepting the claimant's initial assessment without further independent verification could save the insurer significant expenditure on expert reports and prolonged investigation. However, this approach carries a risk of underpayment if the initial assessment proves to be inaccurate. Which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework for claims handling? Option A. Proceed with the expedited settlement based on the initial assessment to realize immediate cost savings, documenting the decision as a business efficiency measure. Option B. Offer a partial settlement based on the initial assessment, contingent on the claimant agreeing to waive further claims to mitigate potential future disputes and costs. Option C. Delay the investigation and communication with the claimant, citing resource constraints, to allow for further internal review and cost-benefit reassessment. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation, including obtaining independent expert reports, to ensure the claim is settled accurately and fairly, even if it incurs higher immediate costs. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the expedited settlement based on the initial assessment to realize immediate cost savings, documenting the decision as a business efficiency measure. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the insurer's financial interests with the claimant's right to a fair and timely settlement, all within the strict confines of the regulatory framework. The pressure to reduce costs must not compromise adherence to legal and regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves prioritizing the claimant's needs and regulatory compliance over immediate cost savings. This means ensuring that all necessary steps are taken to process the claim accurately and efficiently, even if it incurs slightly higher immediate expenses. The regulatory framework, such as the FCA's Principles for Businesses, specifically Principle 6, Customers' Interests, and Principle 7, Communications with Clients, mandates that firms act honestly, fairly, and professionally in accordance with the best interests of their customers. This includes providing clear, accurate, and timely information and ensuring claims are handled with due skill, care, and diligence. Overlooking or delaying necessary investigative steps to save money would breach these principles and potentially violate specific claims, handling regulations designed to protect consumers. An incorrect approach that prioritizes cost reduction by prematurely closing a claim without thorough investigation would fail to uphold the claimant's interests. This would be a direct contravention of regulatory expectations for fair treatment of customers and could lead to allegations of unfair claims settlement practices. Another incorrect approach, which involves delaying communication or providing misleading information to manage claimant expectations and thereby reduce payout, also violates regulatory requirements for transparency and fair dealing. Such actions undermine trust and can result in significant regulatory sanctions, including fines and reputational damage. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant regulatory obligations and the claimant's rights. This framework should then involve a thorough assessment of the claim, considering all necessary investigative steps and potential outcomes. Any decision regarding claim handling must be justifiable against these regulatory standards and ethical considerations, ensuring that cost-saving measures do not lead to a compromise in fairness, accuracy, or timeliness. Question 12. Comparative studies suggest that the principles of insurance are often tested in situations where an insured, having suffered a significant loss, is experiencing considerable emotional distress and urgently requires financial assistance. In such a scenario, a claims handler receives a call from an insured who has just experienced a fire that has destroyed their home and possession. The insured is understandably distraught and immediately asks for an advance payment to cover immediate living expenses, stating they have nowhere to go. The claims handler is aware that a full investigation into the cause and extent of the loss will take some time. What is the most appropriate course of action for the claims handler to take, adhering strictly to the principles of insurance and regulatory expectations for fair claims handling? Option A. Advise the insured on how to best present their claim to ensure they receive the maximum possible payout, given the circumstances. Option B. Inform the insured that no assistance can be provided until the full investigation is complete, and they must make their own arrangements for accommodation and expenses. Option C. Offer to facilitate temporary accommodation and provide information on emergency financial assistance programs available through the insurer or external agencies, while clearly explaining that a full assessment of the claim is required before any settlement can be made. Option D. Immediately authorize an advance payment to cover the insured's immediate living expenses to alleviate their distress, as a gesture of goodwill. The correct answer is C. Offer to facilitate temporary accommodation and provide information on emergency financial assistance programs available through the insurer or external agencies, while clearly explaining that a full assessment of the claim is required before any settlement can be made. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the insured's immediate need for assistance with the insurer's obligation to investigate the claim thoroughly and fairly, all within the bounds of regulatory requirements and ethical principles. The claims handler must act with integrity and avoid any actions that could be perceived as prejudicing the investigation or unfairly benefiting the insured. The correct approach involves acknowledging the insured's distress and offering immediate, practical support that does not compromise the investigation. This aligns with the principle of treating customers fairly, a core tenet of insurance regulation. Specifically, providing information about available resources and offering to facilitate communication with relevant parties demonstrates empathy and a commitment to assisting the insured without admitting liability or prejudicing the outcome of the investigation. This approach upholds the insurer's duty to investigate claims diligently and impartially, as mandated by regulatory frameworks that emphasize fair claims handling. An incorrect approach would be to immediately offer a settlement or advance funds without a proper investigation. This could lead to overpayment if the claim is ultimately found to be invalid or for a lesser amount, violating the insurer's duty to manage its resources responsibly and potentially breaching regulatory requirements related to prudent financial management. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the insured's concerns or refuse any assistance, which would be a failure to treat the customer fairly and could lead to reputational damage and regulatory scrutiny. Finally, providing advice on how to present the claim in a way that maximizes the payout, even if the advice is technically accurate, could be seen as acting outside the scope of the claims handler's role and potentially influencing the claim's outcome in a manner that is not purely objective. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the insured's immediate needs and concerns. They should then consult their internal claims handling procedures and relevant regulatory guidance to determine appropriate actions. The decision-making process should prioritize fairness, transparency, and adherence to regulatory obligations, ensuring that all actions taken are justifiable and documented. Question 13. Quality control measures reveal that a claims handler has settled a motor vehicle insurance claim for damage caused by a collision without investigating whether another driver was at fault or taking any steps to preserve the insurer's right to recover the payout from a potentially liable third party. Which of the following actions, if taken by the claims handler, would have best preserved the insurer's subrogation rights in this scenario? Option A. Informing the policyholder that they must pursue any third-party claims themselves and that the insurer will not be involved in recovery efforts. Option B. Immediately issuing full payment to the policyholder for the assessed damages without further investigation. Option C. Delaying the settlement of the policyholder's claim for an extended period while attempting to gather extensive evidence of third-party fault, potentially beyond what is reasonably necessary for an initial assessment. Option D. Conducting a thorough investigation into the circumstances of the collision to identify any negligent third party and notifying them or their insurer of the insurer's subrogation interest before settling the policyholder's claim. The correct answer is B. Immediately issuing full payment to the policyholder for the assessed damages without further investigation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims handler to balance the immediate need to settle a claim efficiently with the long-term imperative of preserving the insurer's right to recover losses from a responsible third party. Failure to act diligently in preserving subrogation rights can lead to significant financial loss for the insurer and potentially breach regulatory obligations related to prudent claims handling. Careful judgment is required to identify potential subrogation opportunities and implement appropriate actions without unduly delaying the settlement process for the policyholder. The correct approach involves proactively identifying potential third-party liability early in the claim's investigation and taking specific, documented steps to secure the insurer's subrogation rights. This typically includes notifying the responsible third party or their insurer of the claim and the insurer's intent to subrogate, and ensuring that any settlement with the policyholder does not prejudice these rights. This aligns with the principles of good faith and fair dealing expected of insurers and is often implicitly or explicitly supported by regulatory frameworks that emphasize efficient and responsible claims management, including the recovery of losses where appropriate. An incorrect approach that involves settling the claim without investigating potential third-party liability fails to uphold the insurer's financial interests and may violate duties to manage claims prudently. This oversight can result in the irreversible loss of subrogation opportunities. Another incorrect approach, which is to delay settlement indefinitely while pursuing subrogation, can breach the duty to settle claims promptly and fairly, potentially leading to regulatory sanctions for unreasonable delays. Finally, an approach that settles with the policyholder without obtaining a proper release of subrogation rights or without ensuring the policyholder understands their obligations regarding subrogation can create legal complications and undermine the insurer's recovery efforts. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to claims handling that integrates subrogation considerations from the outset. This involves training claims handlers to recognize subrogation triggers, implementing clear protocols for investigating third-party liability, and documenting all actions taken to preserve subrogation rights. When faced with a claim, the decision-making process should involve an initial assessment of potential third-party involvement, followed by a targeted investigation if warranted, and concurrent actions to preserve subrogation rights while progressing the policyholder's claim. Question 14. Investigation of a motor insurance claim reveals significant damage to a policyholder's vehicle following an accident. The policyholder has provided a repair estimate from their preferred garage. What is the most appropriate process optimization approach for the claims handler to ensure a fair and compliant settlement? Option A. Accept the repairer's estimate at face value and authorize payment to the garage, assuming the estimate accurately reflects the damage. Option B. Request detailed historical maintenance records for the vehicle and multiple quotes from various repairers before proceeding with any assessment of the current damage. Option C. Offer a settlement based on a standard repair cost for similar vehicle models, regardless of the specific damage detailed in the estimate. Option D. Commission an independent assessment of the vehicle damage by a qualified assessor to verify the repairer's estimate and the extent of the loss. The correct answer is D. Commission an independent assessment of the vehicle damage by a qualified assessor to verify the repairer's estimate and the extent of the loss. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficient claims processing with the insurer's obligation to accurately assess vehicle damage and ensure fair settlement. The claims handler must navigate potential conflicts of interest and adhere strictly to regulatory requirements designed to protect policyholders. Careful judgment is essential to avoid underpayment or overpayment, both of which can have significant financial and reputational consequences. The correct approach involves a thorough, independent assessment of the vehicle damage by a qualified professional. This ensures that the claim is settled based on objective evidence and industry standards, rather than assumptions or expediency. This aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on fair treatment of customers and accurate claims handling. Specifically, it upholds the principle that an insurer must make a fair offer based on the actual loss suffered by the policyholder, supported by evidence. An approach that relies solely on the repairer's estimate without independent verification is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the regulatory obligation to conduct a proper investigation and can lead to an unfair settlement if the estimate is inflated or inaccurate. It also risks breaching the duty of utmost good faith owed to the policyholder by not ensuring the assessment is objective. Another incorrect approach is to offer a settlement based on a predetermined repair cost for similar vehicles, irrespective of the specific damage sustained. This is a form of arbitrary settlement that disregards the individual circumstances of the claim and the actual loss. It violates the principle of indemnity, which aims to restore the policyholder to their pre-loss financial position, and can be seen as a failure to investigate the specific circumstances of the damage. Finally, delaying the assessment and settlement process to gather extensive, non-essential documentation beyond what is reasonably required to assess the damage is also professionally unsound. While thoroughness is important, unnecessary delays can cause hardship to the policyholder and may breach regulatory expectations for timely claims handling. This approach prioritizes internal process over the policyholder's need for prompt resolution. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic, evidence-based approach to claims assessment. This involves 1. Understanding the policy terms and conditions, 2. Gathering all relevant information, including photographic evidence and expert opinions where necessary, 3. Conducting an independent assessment of the damage, 4. Communicating clearly and transparently with the policyholder, and 5. Ensuring the settlement offer is fair, reasonable, and compliant with all applicable regulations. Question 15. The evaluation methodology shows that when assessing a claim where a claimant's actions may have contributed to their loss, a claims handler must consider the principle of contributory negligence. If a claimant, through their own fault, has contributed to the damage they have suffered, what is the correct regulatory and ethical approach to determining the compensation payable? Option A. Automatically reduce the claimant's compensation by a fixed percentage, regardless of the specific circumstances. Option B. Hold the party against whom the claim is made solely responsible for all damages, even if the claimant's actions clearly exacerbated the loss. Option C. Disregard any contribution by the claimant to the damage, as the primary focus is on the negligence of the party against whom the claim is made. Option D. Reduce the claimant's compensation by a proportion that reflects their share of responsibility for the damage suffered. Correct answer is D. Reduce the claimant's compensation by a proportion that reflects their share of responsibility for the damage suffered. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced application of the law regarding contributory negligence, specifically within the context of the Foundations of Claims Certificate's regulatory framework. Challenge lies in distinguishing between a claimant's own actions that may have contributed to their loss and the primary negligence of the party against whom the claim is made. A claims handler must carefully assess the evidence to determine the extent, if any, to which the claimant's conduct reduced the damages they are entitled to recover, without unfairly penalizing them. This requires a thorough understanding of legal principles and their practical application in claims assessment. The correct approach involves a precise application of the principles of contributory negligence as understood within the relevant jurisdiction for this exam. This means acknowledging that if a claimant has, by their own fault, contributed to the damage they have suffered, their damages may be reduced. The reduction should be proportionate to the claimant's share in the responsibility for the damage. This is ethically sound as it ensures fairness to both parties, holding each responsible for their respective contributions to the loss. Legally, this aligns with the statutory or common law provisions governing contributory negligence, which aim to apportion blame and damages equitably. An incorrect approach would be to automatically assume the claimant is entirely at fault or to ignore their actions altogether, automatically attributing full blame to the claimant for any perceived error on their part, without a thorough assessment of the causal link between their actions and the loss, is a regulatory failure. It contravenes the principle of fair assessment and could lead to an unjust outcome for the claimant, potentially breaching duty of care owed to the claimant. Conversely, completely disregarding the claimant's actions, even when evidence suggests they played a role in causing or exacerbating the loss, is also a regulatory failure. This would mean failing to apply the law correctly, potentially overpaying a claim and not acting in the best interests of the insurer or principal, and failing to uphold the principle of equitable apportionment of loss. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive review of all available evidence. This includes understanding the circumstances of the incident, the actions of all parties involved, and the direct causal links between those actions and the resulting loss. The next step is to identify any fault on the part of the claimant that contributed to the loss. If such fault is identified, the professional must then assess the degree to which the claimant's fault contributed to the damage. This assessment should be objective and based on the evidence. Finally, the damages should be reduced by the determined proportion, ensuring that the claimant receives fair compensation for the portion of the loss not attributable to their own fault. This systematic approach ensures compliance with legal requirements and ethical obligations. Question 16. The risk matrix shows that a delay in acknowledging a new claim and establishing initial contact with the claimant carries a high probability of increasing claimant dissatisfaction and potential regulatory breaches. As a claims handler, you have just received notification of a new claim. Which of the following actions best aligns with the Foundations of Claims Certificate regulatory framework regarding acknowledgement and initial contact, considering the need for a prompt and effective response? Option A. Send a standard acknowledgement letter within the regulatory timeframe, but defer any direct contact or request for information until a full review of the claim file is completed. Option B. Contact the claimant to acknowledge the claim and inform them that their claim will be processed once a preliminary assessment of potential fraud indicators is completed. Option C. Immediately contact the claimant to acknowledge receipt of the claim, confirm essential details, explain the next steps in the claims process, and request any immediate critical documentation required to commence the investigation. Option D. Wait until all supporting documentation has been submitted by the claimant before contacting them to acknowledge the claim and begin the investigation. The correct answer is C. Immediately contact the claimant to acknowledge receipt of the claim, confirm essential details, explain the next steps in the claims process, and request any immediate critical documentation required to commence the investigation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to balance the immediate need for information gathering with the regulatory obligation to acknowledge a claim promptly and establish initial contact. The risk matrix highlights that delays in initial contact can escalate the potential for dissatisfaction, regulatory scrutiny, and even financial implications due to potential missed opportunities for early resolution or fraud detection. The core tension lies in ensuring that the initial contact is both compliant with regulatory timelines and effective in gathering necessary information without overwhelming the claimant or appearing dismissive of their situation. The correct approach involves prioritizing the regulatory requirement for timely acknowledgement and initial contact, even if all necessary information cannot be gathered at that precise moment. This aligns with the principles of good customer service and regulatory compliance, which emphasize prompt communication and setting clear expectations. Specifically, regulatory frameworks for claims handling typically mandate a defined period within which a claim must be acknowledged and initial contact made. This initial contact should aim to confirm receipt of the claim, inform the claimant of the next steps, and outline what information will be required, rather than demanding all details upfront. This proactive and compliant communication builds trust and demonstrates the handler's commitment to processing the claim efficiently and fairly. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on gathering all required documentation before acknowledging the claim fails to meet the regulatory obligation for prompt communication. This delay can lead to claimant frustration, potential complaints, and could be viewed by regulators as a failure to act with due diligence. Another incorrect approach that involves a superficial acknowledgement without clearly outlining the process or next steps, or without attempting to gather essential preliminary information, is also problematic. While it might meet the letter of the law regarding acknowledgement, it fails to meet the spirit of effective claims management and can leave the claimant feeling uncertain and unsupported. A third incorrect approach that involves making assumptions about the claim's validity or coverage based on limited initial information before a proper investigation is initiated is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This can lead to premature decisions, potential bad faith claims, and significant reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance as the foundational step. This involves understanding the specific timelines and requirements for acknowledgement and initial contact as stipulated by the relevant regulatory body. Following this, the handler should assess the immediate information available and determine what is essential for the initial contact to be meaningful and to set the stage for further investigation. The goal is to establish a clear communication channel, manage claimant expectations, and initiate the claims process in a compliant and customer-centric manner, rather than delaying the process to gather every piece of information at the outset. Question 17. The review process indicates that a claims handler is assessing a complex property damage claim. The handler has identified the primary insuring agreement that appears to cover the damage, but has not yet thoroughly reviewed the policy's exclusion clauses or any specific endorsements that might modify coverage. Which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework for the foundations of claims certificate, ensuring a fair and accurate claim assessment? Option A. Focus primarily on the insuring agreement that seems to cover the damage, as this is the core of the policy's promise to the insured. Option B. Rely on general industry standards for similar claims to ensure consistency and efficiency in processing. Option C. Prioritize a comprehensive review of all policy sections, including definitions, insuring agreements, exclusions, and endorsements, to determine the full scope of coverage and any limitations. Option D. Consider the insured's stated expectations and past claims history to interpret the policy's intent, even if it slightly deviates from the literal wording. The correct answer is C. Prioritize a comprehensive review of all policy sections, including definitions, insuring agreements, exclusions, and endorsements, to determine the full scope of coverage and any limitations. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to interpret and apply the specific terms and conditions of an insurance policy to a given set of circumstances, ensuring compliance with the regulatory framework governing insurance claims in the specified jurisdiction. The core of the challenge lies in accurately identifying which policy components are most relevant and how they interact to determine coverage. Careful judgment is required to avoid misinterpreting policy language, which could lead to incorrect claim decisions, customer dissatisfaction, and potential regulatory breaches. The correct approach involves meticulously examining the policy wording, specifically focusing on the definitions section, the insuring agreements, the exclusions, and any endorsements. This systematic review ensures that all relevant clauses are considered in conjunction with the facts of the claim. The regulatory framework for the Foundations of Claims Certificate exam emphasizes a thorough and accurate application of policy terms. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the contractual obligations between the insurer and the insured, adhering to the principle of utmost good faith and the legal requirements for claims handling. It ensures that the decision is based on the agreed-upon terms of the insurance contract, as interpreted within the bounds of relevant legislation and regulatory guidance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the insuring agreement without considering exclusions would be professionally unacceptable. This is because exclusions are integral parts of the policy contract designed to limit or define the scope of coverage. Failing to consider them could lead to an overbroad interpretation of coverage, resulting in claims being paid that were never intended to be covered under the policy. This would violate the principle of contract certainty and could expose the insurer to undue financial risk, potentially contravening regulatory requirements for solvency and fair dealing. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the insured's stated expectations over the explicit policy wording is also professionally unacceptable. While customer service is important, the insurance contract is legally binding. The insurer's obligations are defined by the policy document, not by the insured's subjective understanding or desires, unless those desires are clearly reflected and incorporated into the policy terms. Deviating from the policy wording based on perceived customer expectations without a contractual basis can lead to inconsistent claims handling and may breach regulatory expectations for fair and equitable treatment of all policyholders. Finally, an approach that relies on general industry practice without reference to the specific policy document and its governing regulations would be flawed. While industry practices can offer guidance, they do not supersede the contractual terms of an individual policy or the specific legal and regulatory obligations. Relying on general practice without verifying against the policy and regulations could lead to decisions that are not contractually sound or compliant with the law, potentially resulting in regulatory sanctions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the facts of the claim. Second, identify all relevant sections of the insurance policy, including definitions, insuring agreements, conditions, exclusions, and endorsements. Third, interpret these policy provisions in light of the claim facts, considering any applicable legislation or regulatory guidance. Fourth, document the decision-making process clearly, referencing the specific policy clauses and regulatory provisions that support the conclusion. Finally, communicate the decision clearly and professionally to the insured. Question 18. Market research demonstrates that policyholders often expect immediate settlement of their claims, particularly following a significant loss. A claims professional is handling a complex property damage claim where the policyholder, a business owner, is insistent on a rapid payout to resume operations, providing only a preliminary estimate of damages and expressing frustration with the need for detailed documentation. The claims professional suspects the initial estimate may be inflated and that certain policy conditions might apply, but the policyholder is becoming increasingly agitated about the perceived delay. What is the most appropriate course of action for the claims professional? Option A. Conduct a thorough and independent investigation of the claim, including obtaining all necessary documentation, verifying the loss against policy terms, and communicating findings transparently to the policyholder, while managing expectations regarding the investigation timeline. Option B. Accept the policyholder's preliminary estimate of damages and expedite the settlement to alleviate the policyholder's distress and facilitate a quicker return to business operations. Option C. Inform the policyholder that the claim will be processed only after all business operations have fully resumed, using the delay as leverage to negotiate a lower settlement amount. Option D. Immediately deny the claim based on the suspicion of inflated damages and the policyholder's perceived lack of cooperation, without conducting a full investigation. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough and independent investigation of the claim, including obtaining all necessary documentation, verifying the loss against policy terms, and communicating findings transparently to the policyholder, while managing expectations regarding the investigation timeline. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for a swift resolution and the claims professional's duty to conduct a thorough and fair investigation. The claims professional must balance the need for efficiency with the regulatory and ethical obligations to ensure all relevant facts are gathered and assessed appropriately, without prejudicing the outcome. The pressure from the client to expedite the process, potentially overlooking crucial details, requires careful navigation. The correct approach involves diligently investigating all aspects of the claim, including obtaining and reviewing all supporting documentation, interviewing relevant parties, and assessing the loss against policy terms and conditions. This approach is ethically sound and compliant with regulatory frameworks that mandate fair and impartial claims handling. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good faith and fair dealing, ensuring that the insurer acts honestly and reasonably in its dealings with the policyholder. Regulatory bodies often emphasize the importance of a comprehensive investigation to prevent underpayment or denial of valid claims, and to avoid potential allegations of bad faith. An incorrect approach that involves accepting the client's initial assessment without independent verification would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would breach the duty of care owed to the policyholder and could violate regulatory requirements for thorough claims investigation. It risks overlooking policy exclusions or limitations that might affect the claim's validity or value, leading to potential disputes and regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach, that of immediately denying the claim based on the client's assertion of fraud without conducting a proper investigation, is also professionally unsound. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and could be construed as prejudgment, violating the principles of fairness and impartiality. Regulatory frameworks typically require insurers to investigate allegations of fraud thoroughly before making a determination. Finally, an incorrect approach that involves delaying the investigation unnecessarily to pressure the client into accepting a lower settlement amount is unethical and likely in breach of regulatory guidelines on timely claims handling. Such tactics undermine the trust between insurer and policyholder and can lead to accusations of bad faith. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the policy terms and conditions thoroughly. 2. Gathering all relevant facts and evidence objectively. 3. Assessing the gathered information against the policy and applicable laws. 4. Communicating clearly and transparently with the policyholder. 5. Resisting undue pressure to compromise the integrity of the investigation. 6. Documenting all steps taken and decisions made. Question 19. Assessment of how a claims handler should proceed when investigating an incident where evidence suggests both the insured and a third party may have contributed to the cause of the loss, specifically concerning the application of comparative negligence principles under the Foundations of Claims Certificate Regulatory Framework. Option A. Immediately offer full settlement to the claimant if the third party's negligence is evident, without further investigation into the insured's actions. Option B. Focus exclusively on the insured's actions and determine their percentage of fault, then deduct that percentage from the total damages without considering the third party's role. Option C. Conduct a thorough investigation to identify all contributing factors from all parties, assess the degree of fault for each party based on evidence and legal principles, and apply the jurisdiction's comparative negligence rules to apportion damages accordingly. Option D. Determine the primary cause of the loss and assign fault solely to the party deemed most negligent, disregarding any potential contribution from the other party. The correct answer is D. Determine the primary cause of the loss and assign fault solely to the party deemed most negligent, disregarding any potential contribution from the other party. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the application of comparative negligence principles requires a nuanced understanding of causation and fault apportionment, moving beyond a simple determination of whether negligence occurred. The claims handler must not only identify the contributing factors of all parties, but also assess the degree to which each factor directly caused the loss, a process that can be subjective and contentious. Careful judgment is required to ensure fairness to all parties involved while adhering to the relevant regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation into the actions and omissions of all parties involved in the incident. This includes gathering evidence to establish the sequence of events, identifying any breaches of duty of care, and critically evaluating the causal link between each breach and the resulting damages. The claims handler must then apply the principles of comparative negligence as defined by the applicable jurisdiction's laws to apportion fault proportionally. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal requirement to reduce damages awarded to a claimant by their percentage of fault. Adherence to this principle ensures that the claims settlement is legally sound and ethically defensible, preventing overpayment or underpayment of claims based on the claimant's own contribution to the loss. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the claimant's potential contributory negligence, simply because the other party's negligence appears more significant. This fails to comply with the statutory requirements of comparative negligence jurisdiction, which mandate the consideration of all contributing factors. Ethically, it is unfair to the insurer and its policyholders to bear the full cost of a loss when the claimant also bears some responsibility. Another incorrect approach would be to arbitrarily assign a percentage of fault without a clear evidential basis or a logical application of the legal principles. This demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and can lead to disputes, regulatory scrutiny, and potential bad faith claims. It undermines the integrity of the claims process and fails to uphold the duty of good faith and fair dealing. A further incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the claimant's actions and overlook the negligence of other parties. This would result in an unfair reduction of the claimant's entitlement and could also lead to legal challenges and regulatory sanctions for failing to properly assess all contributing factors to the loss. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, establish the facts of the incident through comprehensive investigation. Second, identify all potentially negligent parties and their respective actions or omissions. Third, determine the legal duty of care owed by each party and whether it was breached. Fourth, assess the causal relationship between each breach and the resulting damages. Finally, apply the specific comparative negligence rules of the governing jurisdiction to apportion fault and calculate the appropriate settlement amount, ensuring all decisions are well documented and supported by evidence and legal reasoning. Question 20. Upon reviewing a motor insurance claim for vehicle damage, the claimant insists on a settlement figure that appears significantly higher than the initial assessment based on standard repair estimates. The claimant expresses frustration, stating they need the money quickly to purchase a replacement vehicle, and that their figure reflects the inconvenience and potential loss of earnings. As a claims assessor operating under the foundations of claims certificate regulatory framework, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Agree to the claimant's requested settlement figure to expedite the claim and maintain customer satisfaction, explaining that this is a goodwill gesture. Option B. Advise the claimant that their concerns about inconvenience and loss of earnings are not covered under the policy, and therefore their requested figure cannot be considered. Option C. Explain to the claimant the process for assessing damages, request specific evidence to support their higher valuation, and discuss how the insurer's assessment is derived, aiming for a mutually agreeable resolution based on policy terms and evidence. Option D. Inform the claimant that their requested figure is unacceptable and offer a significantly lower amount based solely on the insurer's initial repair estimate, without further discussion. Correct answer is A. Agree to the claimant's requested settlement figure to expedite the claim and maintain customer satisfaction, explaining that this is a goodwill gesture. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims assessor to balance the claimant's desire for immediate compensation with the insurer's obligation to ensure accurate and justifiable payouts, all within the bounds of regulatory compliance and ethical practice. The assessor must navigate the potential for undue influence and the importance of objective evidence in determining fair compensation. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the damages, supported by appropriate evidence, and a clear communication of the findings to the claimant. This aligns with the principles of fair dealing and the regulatory requirement to assess claims accurately and without undue delay, while also ensuring that payments are justified by the loss incurred. The Foundations of Claims Certificate Framework emphasizes the importance of evidence-based decision-making and transparent communication. An incorrect approach would be to agree to the claimant's inflated figure without independent verification. This fails to uphold the assessor's duty to the insurer to ensure that payouts are reasonable and proportionate to the actual loss. It also risks setting a precedent for future claims and could be seen as a failure to act with due diligence. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the claimant's concerns outright and refuse any discussion of their perceived losses. This demonstrates a lack of empathy and a failure to engage in a constructive dialogue, which can lead to disputes and damage the professional reputation of the assessor and the insurer. It also overlooks the possibility that the claimant may have valid, albeit perhaps poorly articulated, reasons for their assessment. A further incorrect approach would be to offer a significantly lower figure than what is demonstrably justifiable, solely to expedite the process or to appear cost-effective. This is unethical and potentially breaches regulatory requirements for fair claims handling, as it does not reflect the true extent of the claimant's loss. Professionals should approach such situations by first actively listening to the claimant's concerns and understanding their perspective. They should then explain the claim's assessment process, emphasizing the need for objective evidence and the basis for determining damages. The assessor should clearly communicate what evidence is required and how it will be used to arrive at a fair settlement. If the claimant's figure is significantly different from the assessor's preliminary assessment, the assessor should explain the discrepancies, referencing policy terms and the evidence gathered. The goal is to reach a mutually agreeable settlement based on a sound and justifiable assessment of the damages.